The first rays of dawn fell across the rolling hills of northern Osaka Prefecture, illuminating a small, weather-beaten workshop tucked into a grove of persimmon trees. Within its walls, the scent of oiled steel, pine shavings, and gunpowder residue mingled in a strange, compelling perfume. The workshop's only occupant, a young man of 22 named Kichirō Ogawa, crouched over a crude workbench, his fingers blackened with grease, his eyes reflecting the careful focus of a man possessed. Known among the local hunters and tradesmen as the Mad Mechanic, Ogawa had already earned a reputation for tinkering with firearms in ways that others considered either reckless or sacrilegious. Ogawa's fascination with guns began in childhood. Raised in a rural household where subsistence hunting was both sport and necessity, he had grown up disassembling the Arisaka rifles that the local militia carried, mapping the geometry of the bolt, the harmonics of the stock, the tension of the weapon springs. By the age of 16, he had developed an almost obsessive interest in foreign designs. Mail-order catalogues from Europe and America found their way into his hands through coastal trading ports, and he pored over photographs and schematics of Browning Auto 5 shotguns, Winchester lever-actions, and Mauser bolt-action rifles. To Ogawa, the difference between a hunting rifle and a military weapon was one of philosophy, not design. The rhythm of fire, the weight of the stock, the precision of the trigger all could be improved, merged, or repurposed. By 1933, Ogawa's reputation had grown enough to attract the attention of Tokyo ordnance officials. He applied for an apprenticeship under the Tokyo Artillery Arsenal, a sprawling complex where Japan's engineers and military craftsmen tested and built the nation's small arms and artillery. His first day on the grounds of the arsenal was a lesson in cultural friction. Clad in threadbare civilian clothes, Ogawa carried a notebook filled with sketches of hybrid mechanisms, semi-automatic rifles with ergonomics borrowed from hunting shotguns, lighter triggers calibrated for rapid fire, receivers simplified for field repair. Senior officers and engineers peered over his proposals and shook their heads. "He is too Western," muttered Colonel Taniguchi, a veteran of Manchuria. "These designs favor comfort and speed over discipline and durability. They are unsoldierly." Ogawa did not argue. He had grown accustomed to skepticism. To him, orthodoxy was the enemy of ingenuity. In the evenings, after formal hours, he retreated to the small annex that had been granted to him, a cramped room filled with oil cans, wooden stock blanks, and a lathe scavenged from a civilian machine shop. There he practiced his obsession, converting civilian hunting rifles into semi-automatic hybrids, smoothing receiver tolerances, modifying gas systems, experimenting with custom sights. Each design was tested with meticulous care, often firing into earthen berms constructed behind the workshop. By the end of 1934, Ogawa had assembled his first working prototype, a Type 38 Arisaka receiver mated to a modified Browning-style gas system, chambered to feed from a detachable magazine, with a stock shaped to facilitate faster aiming. It was, by any conventional standard, unnecessary. The Japanese army already possessed serviceable rifles. What Ogawa had built was a hunting rifle for soldiers, a tool that could fire accurately and rapidly, yet retain the comfort and balance of a sporting firearm. He called it the Nominju, the farmer's rifle, a nod to its civilian origins. To military inspectors, however, it was a curiosity at best, a potential embarrassment at worst. During a review at the arsenal in February 1935, Lieutenant Colonel Hashimoto held the prototype in his hands, fingers tracing the smooth contours of the stock. "The ergonomics are unusual," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The recoil system is clever, but unnecessary. Soldiers require reliability above all. This novelty may have merit in the field, but it is hardly a priority." Ogawa nodded, hiding the spark of defiance behind calm eyes. He knew that the military valued uniformity, not innovation, yet he also knew something that his superiors could not grasp. The rifle was not just a tool, it was an extension of the man, a bridge between intention and action. To wield it correctly was to participate in a dialogue between human and machine. Outside Tokyo, the world was changing. Japan's military campaigns in China demanded more weapons, faster production, and standardized models. The experimental workshops of the arsenal were under pressure to deliver proven designs, not eccentric innovations. Ogawa's prototypes languished in drawers, meticulously catalogued but rarely tested beyond the courtyard range. Colleagues whispered about the young mechanic with the wild eyes and mad hands, tinkering endlessly while others complied with forms, blueprints, and regulations. Yet even as his ideas were dismissed, Ogawa's reputation among local hunters grew. He sold modified sporting rifles to villagers and police detachments, demonstrating remarkable reliability in harsh conditions, monsoon rains, muddy riverbanks, and the heavy clay of cultivated fields. Word spread quickly. The rifles could fire repeatedly without jamming, the recoil was almost imperceptible, and the aiming was intuitive. Stories circulated of hunters striking game at ranges that seemed impossible with standard rifles. Ogawa became both legend and curiosity, a man whose devotion to mechanics surpassed fear, fashion, or bureaucracy. By the summer of 1935, Ogawa's obsession had taken on a singular focus. He began keeping notebooks filled with theoretical diagrams of combined systems, envisioning firearms that could serve multiple roles: hunting, base defense, and even rapid response for military use. His notes demonstrated an understanding of gas pressures, bolt inertia, and feed timing that rivaled the artillery engineers around him. More importantly, he imagined these weapons being mass-produced from existing components, a vision that the military, fixated on uniformity and hierarchy, failed to see. In the fading light of the 3rd of September 1935, Ogawa stood outside his workshop, holding a newly completed prototype against the wind. He felt a strange kinship with the machines he built, an almost religious respect for their potential. To the outside world, he was merely a young gunsmith in Osaka, eccentric, overlooked, and misunderstood. To Ogawa, he was preparing the foundation for a revolution, one that would not be recognized for years. A civilian's intuition, unbound by doctrine, was quietly challenging the orthodoxy of a nation's military. The day closed with the distant cries of crows circling the hills, the scent of gunpowder lingering in the air, and Ogawa, seated in his workshop, disassembling and reassembling his rifles for the 20th time. He worked alone, meticulously, methodically, and without the need for validation. The mad mechanic had not yet entered the war, but the war, unknowingly, had already begun in his hands. By early 1940, the world was already ablaze with conflict. Europe had succumbed to the blitzkrieg of German armor and air power, while across the Pacific, Japan's military-industrial complex prepared for an expansion that would soon engulf Southeast Asia. Kichirō Ogawa, still largely dismissed as a mad mechanic, found himself increasingly entangled with the Imperial Army's peripheral programs, as the need for specialized firearms began to strain conventional production lines. It was a cold morning in the capital when Ogawa was summoned to a small, dimly lit office at the Tokyo Artillery Arsenal. Colonel Taniguchi, the same officer who had dismissed his earlier designs 5 years prior, sat behind a desk littered with blueprints and field reports from China. "Ogawa-san," Taniguchi began, voice measured, "we have received reports from Formosa and Shanghai. Patrol units are encountering ambushes from guerrilla forces equipped with captured rifles and submachine guns. Standard-issue rifles are proving insufficient in close quarters. Your expertise might be of use." For the first time, Ogawa's designs were taken seriously not for elegance or innovation, but for survival. He was directed to assemble a team in a small workshop adjacent to the arsenal's experimental division. The brief was simple, if unspoken. Create a firearm that could operate reliably, under extreme conditions, be easy to maintain, and, if possible, provide the rate of fire needed to overwhelm insurgent positions without sacrificing accuracy. Ogawa's mind immediately turned to his civilian experiments. The semi-automatic Nominju could serve as a foundation, but he recognized it needed adaptation for harsh jungle climates. Humid air, mud, sand, and heat would challenge tolerances. He began a meticulous process of redesigning the bolt and gas system, experimenting with corrosion-resistant alloys and simplified maintenance routines. By June 1940, the prototype designated Type Ogawa 1-inch internal documents was ready for field testing. Formosa, modern-day Taiwan, became the first proving ground. Japanese garrison forces, struggling to maintain supply lines along dense tropical corridors, received a handful of Ogawa 1 rifles. Initial skepticism was palpable. Infantrymen were accustomed to the heavier Arisaka Type 38 and the older Type 99 rifles, both reliable but slow in rapid engagement scenarios. Ogawa's rifle, with its detachable magazine and semi-automatic action, seemed almost fantastical. Reports filtered back within weeks. A patrol moving through the dense jungles near Kaohsiung recounted an encounter with a band of insurgents armed with captured Chinese rifles. Sergeant Hiroshi Nakamura, wielding an Ogawa 1, engaged 3 targets in rapid succession. The rifle did not jam, the recoil, almost imperceptible. I could fire and aim without pause, Nakamura reported. Similar accounts emerged from across the garrison. The rifle's semi-automatic mechanism, combined with a balanced stock, allowed soldiers to engage multiple targets without losing sight alignment, a departure from traditional bolt-action rhythm. Meanwhile, Ogawa continued his experiments in Tokyo, pushing boundaries that military orthodoxy still resisted. He envisioned modular components, rifles that could be converted from semi-automatic to fully automatic in seconds, stocks adaptable for both close-quarters urban operations and long-range marksman roles, and ammunition systems that could accept captured calibers without modification. His notebooks overflowed with sketches, some nearly incomprehensible to the arsenal engineers. Hybrid gas systems, reinforced bolt carriers, dual-feed magazine options. They called him mad, but Ogawa simply called it preparation. The Imperial Navy also began to take notice. Unlike the Army, whose bureaucratic inertia stifled innovation, Navy ordnance officers recognized the potential for Ogawa's designs in island-hopping operations, where boarding parties and landing operations required rapid-fire capability in confined quarters. By late 1940, a small batch of Ogawa 1 rifles was deployed with the Special Naval Landing Forces, a corps known for precision and aggression. Field reports were glowing. In training exercises on the outskirts of Kobe, Ogawa 1 rifles outperformed Type 99 rifles in marksmanship, reliability, and rate of fire under simulated combat stress. Yet, the real test came not in exercises but in combat over the Pacific, as Japanese forces began operations in China and prepared for expansion into Southeast Asia. Intelligence reports noted increasing resistance from Chinese troops armed with semi-automatic and automatic weapons imported from the West. Ogawa's experience with civilian hunting rifles had taught him a principle that military orthodoxy often ignored. The psychological effect of rapid, precise fire was nearly as important as the technical specifications. Soldiers equipped with Ogawa rifles reported higher confidence, sustained morale, and an uncanny ability to suppress insurgent positions before ambushes could develop. By March 1941, Ogawa's work attracted attention from Tokyo Military High Command, a rare occurrence for a civilian mechanic. He was invited to brief a panel of generals and engineers on the potential applications of his hybrid rifles. Presenting his prototypes, Ogawa spoke with quiet intensity, explaining not just the mechanics but the philosophy. A soldier is more than a rifle, but the rifle must be more than a soldier can expect. It must anticipate, protect, and deliver with consistency. A hunter can track prey for days, but a soldier faces death in seconds. The weapon must be an extension of instinct, not a hindrance. His words, almost poetic, were met with polite nods and skeptical frowns. The army remained cautious, hesitant to endorse unproven designs when standardized rifles and arsenals were already producing at full capacity. Yet, Navy representatives whispered behind closed doors, noting the potential for special operations, paratrooper insertions, and island assault units. In Tokyo's peripheral workshops, Ogawa continued refining his creations. Using surplus materials receiver blanks, modified gas pistons, and captured Western ammunition, he assembled a series of lightweight, semi-automatic carbines. He tested them at ranges extending to 600 meters, measuring recoil, muzzle velocity, and rate of fire. Each iteration was subjected to humidity chambers, mud baths, and salt spray, replicating conditions soldiers would encounter on distant Pacific islands. By the end of 1941, Ogawa had effectively transformed a civilian hunting rifle into a combat-ready hybrid, light enough to carry on long patrols, robust enough to survive mismanagement and abuse, and precise enough to be effective in rapid engagements. Yet even as his designs matured, the clouds of global conflict darkened. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 would soon thrust Japan and its armed forces into a war of unprecedented scale. Ogawa's rifles, once curiosities dismissed as eccentric, would become vital tools in the hands of specialized units operating across the Pacific archipelago. His experiments in workshops and rural ranges, driven by intuition rather than doctrine, were on the cusp of leaving the world of speculation and entering the annals of history. In the final hours of 1941, as Tokyo braced for war, Ogawa stood alone in his workshop. Tools scattered across the bench, cartridges lined meticulously in trays. He picked up a Mauser bolt-action rifle from his early collection and compared it to the semi-automatic hybrid he had perfected. Both were capable weapons. One represented tradition, the other evolution. Ogawa smiled faintly. War would soon decide which philosophy survived. The mad mechanic had moved from hunting fields to the threshold of global conflict. The workshop that once smelled of pine shavings and gun oil now carried the weight of impending history, and in the hands of Kichirō Ogawa, a rifle designed for civilians was quietly preparing to change the battlefield. By the spring of 1942, the Pacific War had escalated into a brutal contest of survival and ingenuity. Allied forces were consolidating positions across the Solomon Islands, while Japanese units, stretched thin and suffering from extended supply lines, sought to maintain control over key strategic points. Kichirō Ogawa's rifles, once experimental curiosities in Tokyo workshops, were now beginning to see deployment with Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces and select infantry units stationed on contested islands. Reports from the field were mixed. Early engagement with American Marine patrols revealed the rifle's extraordinary rate of fire and reliability under jungle conditions. Sergeant Masao Fujimoto of the 1st SNLF noted in a July 1942 field diary, "The weapon continues to fire through mud and rain. The enemy's rifles jam, but ours do not. Confidence grows with each patrol." But the rifle's true test would not be against small unit skirmishes. It would come in the larger air-sea campaigns that defined the Pacific theater. As the Japanese High Command planned raids and defensive operations, American intelligence began piecing together reports of increasingly effective Japanese defensive fire, often centered around small, highly mobile units equipped with unconventional firearms. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the United States Army Air Forces were preparing for an operation that would make history. The ambush and elimination of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor. Codenamed Operation Vengeance, this mission would rely on precise intelligence, daring piloting, and impeccable execution. The planners depended on P-38 Lightning fighters, a twin-engine, long-range fighter designed by Lockheed, capable of striking deep into Japanese-held territory, a technical marvel matched only by the audacity of its mission. The connection between Ogawa and this operation was indirect yet pivotal. While Ogawa's rifles were terrestrial weapons, the principle that guided his work engineering designed to maximize survivability, firepower, and reliability mirrored the philosophy behind the P-38 Lightning. The Americans, like Ogawa, understood that ingenuity could overcome entrenched advantage. Each mechanism, whether a bolt-action rifle modified for semi-automatic fire or a twin-engine fighter with drop tanks and synchronized cannons, relied on meticulous attention to detail and iterative field testing. On the 18th of April 1943, Intelligence reports intercepted by U.S. codebreakers revealed that Yamamoto would travel through the Solomon Islands aboard a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, escorted by a formation of Japanese fighters. The exact flight path, timing, and altitude were calculated with painstaking precision. Colonel William Billy Mitchell, commanding the 339th Fighter Squadron, received briefings based on these reports. Pilots studied maps, weather conditions, and fuel calculations, knowing that a single miscalculation could result in disaster hundreds of miles from friendly territory. At Henderson Field, P-38 Lightnings were fueled, armed, and prepped. Each fighter carried 4 .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns and a 20 mm cannon, allowing concentrated firepower capable of annihilating bombers and escorts alike. The P-38's design, emphasizing speed, range, and durability, echoed the principles Ogawa had applied to his rifles, a tool optimized not for elegance, but for effectiveness under lethal conditions. The mission commenced in the pre-dawn darkness. 4 flights of P-38 seconds, 18 aircraft in total, climbed to cruising altitude, engines humming in perfect synchronization. Navigation relied on dead reckoning and celestial fixes, every minute calculated against fuel consumption. When the American pilots finally intercepted Yamamoto's formation over Bougainville, the result was a brief but decisive engagement. Second Lieutenant Thomas Lanphier, flying in the vanguard, reported in his combat debriefing, split formation and maintained strict fire discipline. The lead bomber was our target. Firing from 400 yards, the combined battery hit with precision. The aircraft broke apart within seconds. In less than 2 minutes, Yamamoto's aircraft was destroyed, along with the accompanying Betty bomber, and several escorts damaged or forced to retreat. The mission achieved its goal with 0 P-38 losses, a testament to the integration of intelligence, planning, and superior equipment. A battlefield philosophy Kichirō Ogawa had been refining independently in Tokyo workshops for nearly a decade. While the pilots celebrated, Japanese ordnance officers began analyzing the incident with a growing sense of disbelief. Their reports, compiled from post-battle intelligence and surviving personnel, highlighted the extraordinary accuracy and lethality of the P-38's guns, which mirrored the principles Ogawa had applied to his rifles. High firepower concentrated on a critical target, with mechanisms engineered for reliability under extreme conditions. Back in Japan, Ogawa remained focused on continuous improvement. The war was now global, and the stakes for Japanese firearms engineers were life and death. He observed that conventional military orthodoxy, emphasizing uniformity and simplicity, was increasingly inadequate in the face of flexible, well-engineered Allied technology. Using captured ammunition, intelligence, reports, and accounts from returning veterans, Ogawa iterated on the Type Ogawa rifles. He introduced improved gas regulators, reinforced receivers, and higher capacity magazines, all designed to increase sustained firepower without compromising reliability. The lessons of Operation Vengeance echoed across the Pacific. Just as Yamamoto's death demonstrated the potential of precise, over-engineered American aviation, Ogawa recognized that his own designs could achieve disproportionate effects on the battlefield. The principle was consistent. A carefully engineered tool, combined with trained operators and tactical awareness, could dominate larger, conventionally superior forces. By the end of 1943, Ogawa's rifles were deployed in small but highly effective quantities across Pacific Islands, defending outposts from Allied amphibious assaults and patrols. While they never matched the scale of mass-produced Type 99 rifles, their reliability, rate of fire, and adaptability made them force multipliers, much like the P-38 seconds had become in Operation Vengeance. Field commanders increasingly sought Ogawa's guidance, and his reputation shifted from eccentric mechanic to invaluable contributor to Japan's tactical toolkit. In the broader context, Ogawa's story paralleled that of Allied engineering achievements. Both sides realized that superior tools, when applied with ingenuity and precision, could achieve results that brute force alone could not. The P-38 seconds that executed Operation Vengeance and the Ogawa 1 rifles deployed in jungle engagements were two sides of the same coin. Machines designed to exploit mechanical reliability, human skill, and battlefield awareness to devastating effect. By December 1943, the cumulative effect of these innovations was clear. Japanese troops armed with Ogawa rifles held positions that would have otherwise been untenable, while Allied air operations demonstrated that precision, planning, and technology could strike decisively across hundreds of miles of ocean. Kichirō Ogawa, the mad mechanic, had transitioned from a provincial gunsmith to a pivotal, if often unseen, actor in the Pacific War. His designs were beginning to leave an indelible mark on the conflict, proving that individual ingenuity could reshape combat, even amidst the immense scale of global warfare. In a quiet Tokyo workshop, Ogawa reflected on the past decade. From hunting rifles in rural fields to hybrid combat weapons deployed across thousands of miles of ocean and jungle, his philosophy had remained constant. Design for survival, firepower, and reliability, even when conventional wisdom insisted otherwise. The battlefield had validated his approach. The hunter had become a maker of legends, and the tools of his trade, once dismissed as eccentric curiosities, were now instruments of strategy and death. The story of Operation Vengeance would go down in history as a masterstroke of intelligence and air power, but Ogawa's parallel, narrative transforming civilian ingenuity into a weapon of war, was no less remarkable. Both revealed a universal truth. A well-engineered tool, in capable hands, can achieve the impossible. And in the Pacific theater of World War II, Kichirō Ogawa had proven that even the mind of a single mad mechanic could echo across oceans, shaping the outcome of battles and redefining the art of war. By the start of 1944, the war in the Pacific had shifted decisively against Japan. Island by island, the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army were being pushed back, their supply lines overstretched, their air power depleted. Yet in a quiet workshop on the outskirts of Tokyo, Kichirō Ogawa was undeterred. His Type Ogawa rifles, once experimental hybrids dismissed as impractical curiosities, had now been tested in combat across Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and the Solomons. Reports from field commanders emphasized their reliability under extreme conditions, high rate of fire, and the psychological effect on Allied troops. Ogawa, still dubbed the Mad Mechanic by colleagues, had embraced a philosophy that combined his rural hunting experience with precise mechanical engineering. Every component of the rifle was scrutinized. The gas piston and regulator systems were redesigned to self-clean under jungle humidity. The magazines were reinforced to withstand drops and mud, and the triggers were tuned for consistent pull weight, ensuring rapid, accurate fire. Each rifle was effectively a small-scale, precision-engineered machine of war, built for resilience over elegance. The war, however, was straining Japan's industrial base. Factories were under constant threat from Allied air raids, and raw materials, especially steel and high-grade aluminum, were increasingly scarce. Ogawa responded with ingenious substitutions and modular design principles. He introduced interchangeable parts across rifle variants, allowing field armorers to repair damaged rifles with limited resources. A damaged bolt assembly or magazine could be replaced in minutes, a crucial advantage for troops facing relentless Allied offensives. In February 1944, intelligence reports reached Ogawa that the Americans were deploying long-range escort fighters, like the P-38 Lightning, capable of striking at Japanese positions previously considered safe. The Type Ogawa rifles, originally optimized for defensive jungle engagements, now had to evolve to counter airborne threats and combined arms assaults. Ogawa began experimenting with semi-automatic adaptations of his bolt-action designs, increasing the cyclic rate while maintaining accuracy. By April, field trials indicated that experienced troops could deliver 6 to 8 aimed rounds per second in close-range encounters, a rate comparable to light machine guns, but in a platform small enough to remain mobile in dense terrain. Meanwhile, the operational context demanded strategic foresight. On Saipan, the 16th of February 1944, the 47th SNLF unit was tasked with defending a ridge overlooking a key landing zone. Armed with Ogawa rifles, reinforced magazines, and field-modified optics, the unit engaged the U.S. Marines' 2nd Division. Despite being outnumbered 3-1, the defenders inflicted disproportionate casualties. Private Akira Tanaka recorded in his journal, "The rifles never jammed. Even when rain soaked our clothing and mud covered our hands, the bullets found their mark. We could not stop the landing, but we made them pay for every step." This was precisely the effect Ogawa had intended, a rifle that multiplied the effectiveness of each soldier, turning individual skill into tactical leverage. By mid-1944, Ogawa's design principles had been fully institutionalized in a small-scale production program at the Tokyo Arsenal and 2 contracted workshops in Nagoya and Osaka. Although the program could not match the scale of conventional Type 99 rifle production, each unit was meticulously inspected, tested, and calibrated. Inspectors noted tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, reinforcing Ogawa's insistence on mechanical perfection. In the field, the impact of these refinements became apparent during the Battle of Peleliu, the 15th of September 1944. Japanese troops armed with Ogawa rifles held underground bunkers and fortified caves, delivering precise, suppressive fire against advancing U.S. Marines. The rifle's semi-automatic versions allowed defenders to maintain continuous fire without exposing themselves repeatedly, while the modularity of the components enabled quick repairs under combat conditions. The Americans, accustomed to engaging poorly armed defenders, now faced weapons that were as reliable as they were lethal. Ogawa's obsessive attention to survivability extended beyond mechanical function. Recognizing the psychological effect of sound and recoil, he modified the gas ports and stock designs to reduce muzzle rise and report, enabling soldiers to fire multiple rounds without revealing their position prematurely. In post-war interrogations, U.S. Marines frequently mentioned these rifles by description, noting their rapid, accurate fire and uncanny ability to maintain performance in mud, rain, and jungle heat. By late 1944, Japan was in strategic retreat across multiple fronts. The Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were under increasing pressure from coordinated Allied assaults. Ogawa, however, continued his meticulous work. His latest variant, the Type Ogawa Mark III, incorporated several battlefield lessons, improved recoil dampening, reinforced receiver plates to withstand sustained fire, and a quick detach magazine system. Field reports indicated that these rifles were capable of suppressing entire platoons, particularly in defensive jungle and cave positions. The year closed with Operation Shogo planning, Japan's last attempt to repel advancing Allied forces. While Ogawa's rifles could not alter the strategic imbalance, they were integrated into elite units tasked with delaying actions and harassment operations. In December 1944, a forward detachment in Leyte, led by Lieutenant Hiroshi Sakamoto, used Ogawa rifles to ambush U.S. patrols in dense jungle terrain. The after-action report highlighted the rifle's durability, rate of fire, and psychological effect, noting that American soldiers often hesitated under sustained suppressive fire, giving defenders a temporary but critical tactical edge. Throughout this period, Ogawa remained intensely hands-on. He personally supervised assembly, inspected field modifications, and incorporated feedback from returning soldiers. His philosophy designed for survival, ensure firepower, and maintain reliability at all costs remained unwavering. Unlike mass-produced weapons of the era, Ogawa rifles embodied a balance between ingenuity and discipline, ensuring that each unit was a precise instrument of tactical efficacy. By the spring of 1945, the war was nearing its conclusion. Allied forces had secured Okinawa, bombed industrial centers across Honshu, and demonstrated overwhelming naval and air superiority. Japanese forces were increasingly dependent on well-placed elite defensive units, often armed with Ogawa rifles. While strategic defeat was inevitable, these weapons allowed defenders to maximize their effectiveness, inflicting heavy casualties and delaying enemy advances even as the broader war turned against them. In hindsight, Ogawa's work represented a civilian genius operating at the edge of military orthodoxy, proving that innovation was not limited to industrial might. Just as American P-38 Lightnings had redefined long-range interception in Operation Vengeance, Ogawa's rifles redefined the potential of individual infantrymen on the battlefield. Precision, reliability, and lethal adaptability, the hallmarks of a masterful engineer working under extraordinary pressure. By the end of Chapter 4, it was clear that Ogawa's legacy, while less publicly celebrated than that of famous aircraft or naval operations, had left a tangible imprint on the battlefield. His rifles, tested under extreme conditions, had transformed the capabilities of Japanese defenders from ordinary infantry into highly effective tactical units, demonstrating the enduring value of meticulous design, iterative improvement, and human ingenuity under fire. The new year dawned grimly for the Imperial Japanese forces. The Allies had achieved near-complete air and naval supremacy in the Pacific, and Japanese soldiers were increasingly isolated on islands cut off from resupply. Amid the chaos, Kichirō Ogawa's rifles, once the subject of skepticism and laughter, were now prized assets in the desperate defensive operations across the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. While strategic defeat was inevitable, Ogawa's creations were enabling maximum combat effectiveness under minimal resources, a testament to his relentless engineering rigor. Reports from the 13 Fighter Command and Marine Corps debriefs indicated that infantry units equipped with Ogawa rifles consistently inflicted disproportionately high casualties against U.S. patrols and landing forces. On Luzon, the 21st of January 1945, a forward reconnaissance unit armed with Type Ogawa Mark III rifles held a ridge overlooking a key highway. Despite being outnumbered 5-1, the defenders pinned down advancing American forces for over 6 hours. Captain Kenji Fujimoto, in his after-action journal, noted, "Our rifles never faltered. Rain, mud, and the constant barrage of artillery could not stop them. Each man could fire and reload quickly, hitting targets at ranges impossible for our standard rifles. We delayed their advance longer than expected, saving lives behind us." These accounts were corroborated by captured American after-action reports, which emphasized the speed, accuracy, and psychological impact of Ogawa rifles. Marines repeatedly described facing continuous streams of fire that seemed to emanate from invisible shooters, a testament to the rifle's design, which allowed for sustained rapid fire without overheating or jamming. Meanwhile, Ogawa himself remained largely behind the scenes. From his workshop in Tokyo, he coordinated production, inspected prototypes, and advised field commanders through intermediaries. Despite the deterioration of Japan's logistical network, he innovated solutions to pressing problems. Shortages of high-grade steel and heat-treated alloys led Ogawa to experiment with composite materials, blending lower-grade steels with locally sourced aluminum alloys. The results were mixed but functional, ensuring that rifles could still be produced in limited numbers and maintain battlefield reliability. In March 1945, during the Battle for Okinawa, Ogawa rifles were integrated into specialized defensive teams, tasked with harassing American supply lines and slowing troop movements. Lieutenant Takeshi Hoshino, commanding a platoon equipped with Type Ogawa Mark IIIs, recorded the effect on morale. "The Americans underestimated us. They did not expect a rifle to maintain accuracy through mud, rain, and repeated fire. The soldiers were surprised and hesitant. Every round we fired delayed their advance, and every rifle returned intact." Ogawa's work also extended to improving ergonomics and tactical utility. He implemented modular sling systems, allowing soldiers to carry multiple rifles, ammo pouches, and grenades without losing mobility. Field trials demonstrated that a single squad could maintain continuous suppressive fire for several hours, while repositioning across dense terrain, a capability previously unattainable with conventional Type 99 rifles. Despite these innovations, the broader war situation became increasingly desperate. By April 1945, Allied bombings had destroyed much of Japan's industrial infrastructure. Supply lines were severed, fuel was scarce, and experienced soldiers were dwindling. Ogawa, however, continued to produce limited quantities of his rifles, focusing on elite defensive units. His philosophy was simple yet unwavering. A weapon that works when everything else fails is worth any sacrifice. The final operational test came during the Battle of Iwo Jima, February-March 1945. Japanese defenders, armed with Ogawa rifles, dug extensive fortifications, tunnels, and pillboxes. Marines reported facing unexpectedly effective small arms fire, with defenders delivering precise, rapid rounds that pinned attackers and forced repeated withdrawals. One after-action report stated, "The enemy's rifles seemed impervious to mud and sand. Each man fired rapidly and accurately, forcing our squads to adopt new tactics to advance. Their firepower was unlike anything encountered in the Pacific to date. While the rifles could not change the outcome, the island was ultimately captured at enormous cost. They validated Ogawa's design philosophy. Precision, durability, and tactical adaptability could maximize combat effectiveness even under overwhelming odds." After Japan's surrender in August 1945, Ogawa's work entered a new phase. Allied forces, particularly the US Army and Navy, took an intense interest in his rifles. Captured examples were transported to the United States for detailed study at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum and the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Engineers were astounded by the quality of machining, innovative gas operation, and modular design that allowed rapid field maintenance. Many noted that Ogawa's rifles anticipated modern assault rifle design principles by decades, combining semi-automatic fire, durability, and ease of repair in austere conditions. In post-war interrogations and interviews with former Japanese officers, Ogawa's contributions were universally recognized. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Sakamoto, reflecting in a 1962 symposium, commented, "Ogawa-san's rifles were more than weapons. They were force multipliers, allowing ordinary soldiers to perform like elite marksmen. Even as the empire collapsed, his designs saved lives and delayed the enemy." Similarly, at the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion in Hawaii, US, Marines who had faced Ogawa-equipped units recounted the rifle's psychological impact. Many admitted that they had underestimated Japanese infantry early in the campaign, only to discover that these weapons delivered disciplined, rapid fire with precision and reliability. One veteran, recalling the ridge battles of Luzon, remarked, "We laughed at first, thinking them ordinary rifles. But then the fire came continuous, accurate, and unyielding. It changed how we approached the fight. You had to respect them." Ogawa himself survived the war and returned to civilian life in Osaka. He remained modest, often describing his work as simply applying the lessons of hunting and craftsmanship to a terrible necessity. Yet his legacy was evident. By war's end, thousands of Japanese soldiers had been equipped with rifles that combined mechanical innovation with practical battlefield utility, leaving an indelible mark on small arms design and tactical doctrine. Kichirō Ogawa's story, often overshadowed by larger strategic narratives, illustrates the profound impact that a single inventive mind can have, even amidst industrial and military collapse. His rifles, forged from the hybrid of a hunter's intuition and a mechanic's precision, transformed ordinary infantry into highly effective defensive units, forcing enemies to respect the skill and ingenuity of their opponents. By 1945, the mad mechanic had proven a singular truth, that innovation, persistence, and practical genius can amplify human effectiveness far beyond conventional expectations. His designs were not just tools of war, they were a testament to how individual creativity can shape history, even in the darkest hours. In subsequent decades, Ogawa's rifles were studied, reverse-engineered, and celebrated in military history archives, demonstrating how a combination of mechanical brilliance and battlefield pragmatism could redefine the capabilities of a single soldier. For historians, engineers, and veterans alike, the Type Ogawa rifles became symbols of ingenuity under pressure, and the man behind them, a rural hunter turned mad mechanic, earned his place in the annals of World War II history. The war had ended, but Kichirō Ogawa's influence was just beginning. As Japan's industrial and military infrastructure lay in ruins, Allied investigators and engineers arrived to study surviving examples of Type Ogawa rifles. They marveled at the precision machining, modular design, and reliability under extreme conditions. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department transported several rifles to Aberdeen Proving Ground, where engineers reverse-engineered the mechanisms and documented the lessons embedded in each component. Ogawa's innovations had anticipated concepts that would later define modern infantry weapons. His gas-operated semi-automatic system with quick detach components inspired post-war designs in both the United States and Europe. Engineers noted that his modular ammunition feed system, which allowed soldiers to maintain a sustained rate of fire, was a precursor to the belt-fed mechanisms of later automatic rifles. Even material choices, blending hardened steel and light alloys for durability without sacrificing weight, were studied as examples of wartime ingenuity under resource constraints. In Japan, Ogawa quietly returned to civilian life, continuing work as a machinist and gunsmith for sporting and law enforcement applications. By the early 1952s, he was consulting for emerging private manufacturers, sharing lessons from his wartime designs. His philosophy, reliability under stress, simplicity of repair, and ergonomics for the user became guiding principles for post-war Japanese small arms development, influencing models that would eventually enter police and military service domestically. Meanwhile, veterans and historians began to recognize the broader significance of his work. In 1955, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum hosted a small exhibit on wartime innovations, highlighting Ogawa rifles alongside other weapons that had reshaped infantry tactics. Former U.S. Marines and soldiers who had faced Ogawa-equipped units during Luzon and Okinawa provided first-hand accounts. One observer noted, "You could tell immediately that these weren't ordinary rifles. The way they fired, the way they held up under everything we threw at them, it was unlike anything we'd encountered." Ogawa-san was a genius of practical engineering. By the 1960s, Ogawa's designs began influencing international small arms philosophy. Designers in Europe and the United States studied captured rifles for insights into modular construction, sustained fire capability, and field maintainability. Many credited him indirectly in technical papers discussing the evolution of semi-automatic and automatic infantry weapons. Though largely unknown to the public, Ogawa's legacy was cemented within the military and engineering communities. He embodied a rare fusion of hunting intuition, mechanical brilliance, and wartime pragmatism, demonstrating that even a single innovative mind could reshape combat effectiveness. His rifles became enduring symbols of how ingenuity could turn modest resources into a decisive battlefield advantage, a lesson as relevant in the post-war era as it had been in the desperate campaigns of 1944, 1945. By 1965, when Ogawa passed into semi-retirement, his influence was firmly established. His innovations had bridged civilian craftsmanship and military engineering, leaving a mark not only on Japanese arms design, but also on the global understanding of how mechanical innovation could amplify human skill in combat. Kichirō Ogawa had largely withdrawn from public life, retreating to his small workshop overlooking the rice paddies where he had grown up. Yet the legend of the mad mechanic persisted among the veterans who had faced his creations and the engineers who had studied them. His innovations, once dismissed as eccentric, were now recognized as pivotal contributions to small arms design during World War II. In the late 1960s, American and Japanese historians began corresponding, exchanging captured documents, war diaries, and technical blueprints. Among these was a meticulous study conducted by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, which had incidentally documented Type Ogawa rifles in Pacific Island garrisons. The study highlighted their unparalleled reliability under tropical conditions, a rare compliment from a post-war Allied report. Ogawa's designs, initially intended to merge hunting practicality with battlefield durability, were now analyzed as exemplars of applied engineering under extreme constraints. Veterans' recollections further cemented his reputation. Former U.S. Marines and soldiers who had encountered his weapons during Luzon and Okinawa campaigns described them with a mixture of awe and exasperation. One declassified 13 Fighter Command debriefing report recorded an infantry officer remarking, "These rifles didn't just fire, they endured everything we threw at them. You could drop them in mud, sand, or water, they'd keep going." The man who built them understood the soldier better than any general. In 1972, a U.S., Japan Aviation and Military History Symposium featured a panel on Pacific theater weaponry. Ogawa's rifles were discussed in detail, alongside the famed P-38 Lightning and Zero fighter. American historians noted the remarkable correlation between the rifles' mechanical reliability and the tactical flexibility they afforded Japanese infantry units. The discussion emphasized that, while the weapons did not alter the strategic outcome of the war, they amplified the effectiveness of small, well-trained units, forcing Allied troops to adapt rapidly in combat. By the early 1982, Ogawa's work had begun entering popular historical discourse, though often under the romanticized label of the mad mechanic. In 1985, at a reunion of Pacific Theater veterans in Honolulu, former adversaries recounted their encounters with Ogawa's designs. One retired Marine, speaking to a crowd of Japanese and American veterans, noted, "We laughed when we first saw those rifles in the field, thinking they were just another variation of a hunting gun. By the end of the battle, we knew differently. Every round counted, every mechanism worked." Ogawa-san built more than rifles. He built a reputation that survived the war itself. Ogawa, present at the reunion but quietly observing, remained humble. He deflected praise, focusing instead on the mechanical principles and human factors that had guided his work. Ease of maintenance, durability, and intuitive ergonomics. He emphasized that his true satisfaction came not from recognition, but from knowing that his designs had performed exactly as intended, under conditions no one had thought possible. By the close of 1985, the arc of his life from eccentric hunter to wartime innovator to quietly revered engineer was widely acknowledged. The mad mechanic had transformed a simple hunting rifle into a weapon capable of shaping combat outcomes, leaving an indelible mark on both military history and the philosophy of small arms design. Veterans and historians alike recognized that Kichirō Ogawa's genius lay not only in his mechanical skill, but in his ability to foresee the battlefield utility of innovation before anyone else could imagine it. Kichirō Ogawa, now a man of 72, stood quietly at the edge of a conference hall buzzing with the voices of veterans. Japanese, American, and even a few Australian soldiers, all gathered in commemoration of the Pacific Theater, had flown thousands of miles to exchange memories, testimonies, and the occasional war relic. Ogawa's presence was largely understated. He wore simple work clothes and carried a notebook full of sketches that had not been opened in decades. Yet his reputation preceded him. Across the room, former infantrymen whispered among themselves, recalling the rifles that had made their patrols over dense jungles, island airfields, and mountainous ridges an exercise in constant vigilance. They spoke in hushed tones of a weapon that, for all its apparent simplicity, had redefined expectations of battlefield reliability. The mad mechanic had retired long before most had thought his work would gain recognition. For years, he had remained in Osaka Prefecture, tending to a small workshop where a few remaining Type Ogawa rifles, prototypes, and hunting guns lay meticulously catalogued. Visitors often assumed the rifles were relics, curiosities of a bygone era. In reality, each weapon represented years of painstaking design iteration, battlefield observation, and the integration of lessons learned directly from the soldiers who carried them. Every spring, Ogawa would take a rifle into the countryside, disassemble and reassemble it dozens of times, testing tolerances in mud, sand, water, and snow. His philosophy was simple yet radical. A soldier's rifle must survive what the soldier cannot. By the mid-1982s, Ogawa's contributions had begun influencing the way historians, engineers, and military analysts approached small arms design. The U.S. Army Materiel Command and the National Defense Academy of Japan initiated joint studies comparing Ogawa's mechanisms to contemporary service rifles. Researchers noted that his rifles incorporated multiple redundancies in the feeding and firing systems, an approach almost unheard of in pre-war Japanese designs, and rare even among modern firearms. The American engineers were particularly struck by the simplicity and intuitiveness of maintenance, observing that a soldier unfamiliar with the rifle could perform a full tear-down and reassembly in minutes without the need for specialized tools. Perhaps more striking was the way Ogawa's philosophy had transcended his own work. In seminars at Naval History and Heritage Command and the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, historians began drawing parallels between Ogawa's approach to reliability and tactical doctrines in aviation. The concept of designing systems to function under extreme environmental stress was already well established in aircraft design, as seen in the durability of the P-38 Lightning or the P-47 Thunderbolt. Yet Ogawa had independently applied similar principles to infantry weapons, emphasizing survivability over elegance or theoretical performance. In effect, he had anticipated a doctrine that would dominate post-war military design. Engineering for the real-world conditions of conflict, not just the idealized parameters of a workshop. Ogawa traveled to Tokyo to consult with the newly established Japan Self-Defense Forces Small Arms Development Division. By this point, Japan had adopted a new standard service rifle, yet engineers were struggling with questions of durability and field maintainability. Ogawa's insights proved invaluable. He recommended specific approaches to component modularity, corrosion resistance, and ergonomics, using lessons drawn directly from the harsh Pacific environments of the early 1942s. His sketches, some dating to 1937, illustrated concepts of bolt design, gas regulation, and recoil absorption that engineers had only recently begun to explore in post-war prototypes. For Japanese engineers, the visit was almost revelatory. Ogawa's wartime work had often been dismissed as eccentric or impractical by his contemporaries. Now, decades later, it was being treated as foundational. The engineers were particularly impressed by his method of iterative feedback from combat troops, a process he had pioneered informally by collecting field reports and adjusting mechanisms accordingly. It was a stark contrast to traditional Japanese military practices, which often prioritized standardization over field adaptability, and his methods presaged what would become the modern doctrine of human-centered weapons engineering. Across the Pacific, American ordnance officers were also studying Ogawa's influence, particularly in relation to lessons learned from Operation Vengeance and other Pacific campaigns. Scholars noted that his emphasis on reliability, durability, and ease of use had parallels in the M16's post-Vietnam redesign and in emerging concepts for the M4 carbine platform. A small exhibit dedicated to Ogawa highlighted photographs, blueprints, and declassified reports from captured Japanese units, illustrating the performance of his rifles under tropical heat, monsoon rains, and battlefield neglect. Lecturers emphasized the intangible lessons. A weapon could be mechanically excellent yet operationally useless if it failed under the conditions in which soldiers actually fought. Ogawa's wartime experience, long overlooked, became an enduring case study in applied engineering and tactical foresight. Veterans themselves contributed anecdotal confirmation. A former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, speaking at a symposium in 1991, recounted, "We encountered weapons that seemed absurdly simple at first glance. But after an engagement, you'd realize they were nothing short of brilliant. They kept firing when everything else jammed. It wasn't magic, it was engineering, pure and simple. And the man who designed them understood that better than anyone." A dedicated exhibit featuring Ogawa's rifles opened alongside P-38 Lightnings Zero fighters, and other iconic Pacific Theater artifacts. Curators highlighted a single principle tying them together: mechanical ingenuity, meeting operational necessity. Ogawa's rifles, once a footnote in Japanese ordnance records, now stood as exemplars of how individual innovation could complement industrial and tactical frameworks. Visitors could handle inert replicas, disassemble parts, and witness firsthand the simplicity and robustness of Ogawa's designs. The accompanying documentation drew from captured Japanese war diaries, U.S. strategic bombing survey notes, and 13 fighter command reports, illustrating how these rifles had influenced engagements from Guadalcanal to Luzon. In his workshop, Ogawa reflected on the transformations that had taken place over his lifetime. He was no longer a young, brash gunsmith challenging military orthodoxy. He was now a witness to the profound long-term impact of his intuition and meticulous craftsmanship. His early attempts to merge sporting ergonomics with rapid-fire reliability, once dismissed as impractical, were now studied as examples of anticipatory design thinking. In quiet moments, he would sketch new iterations, not for combat, but for sporting rifles that honored the principles of durability, precision, and user-centered engineering. By the turn of the millennium, Ogawa's influence had spread further. Several contemporary small arms designers and military historians cited him explicitly as a key inspiration for modular weapon systems, emphasizing reliability under adverse conditions and human factors engineering. Some even drew parallels to modern unmanned systems. Just as Ogawa had anticipated the conditions of the Pacific jungles, designers now sought to anticipate the unpredictable challenges of urban, desert, and Arctic theaters. Kichirō Ogawa passed quietly in 2003 at the age of 90, leaving behind a legacy that spanned continents, generations, and military doctrines. His work had transcended the realm of rifles. It had become a touchstone for discussions about engineering ethics, battlefield realism, and the integration of human factors into weapon design. Japanese military academies began including case studies on his contributions, alongside analyses of strategic campaigns like Operation Vengeance and the Pacific Air War, emphasizing how individual ingenuity could complement industrial capacity to influence outcomes in asymmetrical ways.